Hey church, today we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Just a little background. One of the things that Paul is writing this epistle to the church at Corinth is that these are basically new Christians. Paul had spent about a year and a half in Corinth starting the church, and now he's been gone for about a year and a half. And so the oldest Christians in this church are just 3 years old. So they're very young Christians, and they begin to have some of the problems that young Christians have. They began to kind of wander and stray away from the simplicity of the gospel. And so one of the reasons that Paul writes 1 Corinthians is to help restore order, to help respond to some of the questions they had, and to call them to account of really staying focused on the narrow path that God had called them to. So it starts out in verse 1, and when I came to you, brethren, I did not come with superiority of speech or of wisdom, proclaiming to you the testimonies of God. For I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling, and my message and my preaching were not in persuasive words of wisdom, but in demonstration of spirit and of power. One of the things that the early church would have been susceptible to is going after all these schools of philosophy. That Greek philosophy and in the first century in Rome, that would have been these different schools of philosophy would have been very prominent. And so the church was beginning to be seduced by these kind of flashy, polished messages of these great philosophers and great schools of philosophy, and began to go after the culture of the day. And Paul says, I didn't come to you with any of that kind of worldly wisdom. In fact, he says, I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And this is really the secret sauce of the Apostle Paul's ministry. As you think about how he was so effective at building churches and as an evangelist and converting people and just all the apostolic things he did in the first century, is he was just focused on preaching the simplicity of the gospel. Not trying to present himself and come with them with all kind of flashy ideas or great speeches or any of that kind of stuff, to just be focused on the gospel. You know, if the first church was susceptible to flashy teaching and polished messages, how much more in this information age, where in your pocket you have a gateway into the most produced, millions and billions of dollars being spent on TV shows and movies and YouTube videos and podcasts and all the different forms of media that we have that we have at our fingertips. And all these messages we're constantly being bombarded with that are so so polished and so carefully curated to be so specific and so just try to really garner an audience and gather people themselves. The Apostle Paul, if he had a message for us, if they were susceptible to that, then his message is still the same today. Let's move all that stuff off the table and let's focus on the simplicity of the gospel. Let's not make it about personalities or people. Let's make it about the simple truth of Christ and him crucified. That is really the most powerful thing that we can understand. And so that message that worked for him back then in the first century is the same message we need to be preaching today. Look, I don't know what you think about me. We don't have a lot of flash. We don't have a lot of glitz. But I just want to preach the Christ and him crucified, the simplicity of the Word of God, the full counsel of God, and the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's enough. That's what really transforms people. And so he goes on to say, this is going to be the theme he's going to bring out through this entire chapter. And in verse 6 he says, Yet we do not speak wisdom among those who are mature, a wisdom, however, not of this age, nor of the rulers of this age who are passing away, but we speak God's wisdom in a mystery, the hidden wisdom which God predestined before the ages of our glory, the wisdom which none of the rulers of this age has understood, for if they had understood it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. He's contrasting and comparing the wisdom that the world has with the wisdom that the church has. And he says that the wisdom the church has, the world doesn't have. They don't know it. In fact, it seems foolish to them. They can't understand it because it's spiritually understood. This really explains so much about the world that we live in. You know, we have so many of the elites of our day, the powerful people, the people who are educated at our premier schools and hold these premier positions in our culture. So many of them are so blind and foolish. They're filled with the wisdom of the world, and yet they can't figure out really basic things about biology and how life should work, how government should work, how finances should work. You think about how much foolishness is out there, really blindedness. And it's because these people are blind to the truth. They can't spiritually understand the wisdom that comes from above, the wisdom that God has. it really helps us understand our place in the world. And really, if we go down to verse 12, he kind of sums it up here, and this is really helpful for us to understand. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but we've received the Spirit who is from God, so that we may know the things freely given to us by God, which things we also speak, not in words taught by human wisdom, but in those taught by the Spirit, combining spiritual thoughts and spiritual words. But a natural man does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, and he cannot understand them because they are spiritually appraised. But he who is spiritual appraises all things, yet he himself is appraised by no one. You know, as you talk to your friends and neighbors and coworkers and share the gospel, so many of them will begin to look at you sideways like you're crazy. Like the stuff you're talking about, the stuff you believe is you might as well be like a flat earther or, you know, some kind of conspiracy theory or something like that. And the reason is because their hearts are darkened. Now, here's the temptation. This was the temptation in the first century, and it's a temptation today, is to begin to believe the world's wisdom, to begin to follow after and seek after the world's wisdom, to want to be approved by the world's wisdom. But the problem is so simple with that. If we're trying to be approved by those people who are spiritually darkened, who are spiritually ignorant, who don't understand, then we're never going to be able to receive the things of God. And so to walk with God and to be a Christian, you have to be willing to accept that you're going to be rejected, that people are not going to understand you. They're not going to understand your message. It's going to be foolishness to them. But he ends up in that last verse in 15, he says, but he who is spiritual appraises all things. You understand the world. You understand the way the world works because you have the Spirit of God living in you and you have the wisdom of God at your fingertips. Yet he himself is appraised by no one. The world cannot judge you. The world cannot. We need to stop caring about what the world thinks because it's God who is the one who's going to judge us. And it's through him that we see everything else and understand everything else. You know, as we embrace that and walk in that truth, God is going to lead us into deeper and deeper knowledge, deeper and deeper understanding, and we're going to be able to help more and more people in this dark time. God bless you, church, and we'll see you tomorrow.